Hey guys, it's Lish from Devalishangell, and today I'm going to show you how to make this cute little applique dress. If I could only wear one dress for the rest of my life, this would be the one. So this is my original drawing, not the best drawer, but you can get the idea. Pretty much mesh in the front with the applique fabric, and then the back with stretchy fabric. So here are the three fabrics that I'm using: a stretchy lyrica fabric, a applique fabric, and then a two-way stretch invisible mesh fabric. So I'm just going to use this dress for the pattern, but I'm just going to take in the arm piece a little bit. And since I don't need the collar, I'm going to take in this neck part a little bit too, so it's smaller. And I always double check to make sure that my pattern fabric is just as stretchy as the fabric that I'm going to be using. The front of this dress, since it has appliques, is going to lose a lot of its stretchiness when I add those. So I am adding extra seam allowance to the back, and I'm going to add even more to the front to make up for that difference. So here I am just tracing the dress with a washable marker and making those changes that I wanted to use. I make all my patterns by just tracing clothes that I already have. And here I'm just kind of double checking to make sure I got all the measurements right and didn't make it too small. So once that looks good, I'm going to go ahead and cut it out. I usually always will cut just half of a pattern out if it's going to be symmetrical, and then I'll fold it so it meets the other side and then cut it like that. That way it comes out even on both sides. So for the front part of this dress, I'm going to make the bottom like skirt part in the same fabric, and then I'm going to make the top part in the invisible mesh. So here I'm just tracing out the bottom skirt part, and I am adding more seam allowance to the sides and stuff, just because, like I said, once you add the appliques on, the front part of the dress really isn't going to stretch that much, so I'm kind of need some extra space to make up for that. And since this one is a symmetrical pattern too, I'm going to do the same thing where I cut half of it, fold it so it meets the other side, and then cut the rest. So I kind of compared it to my body and realized that it was a little long, so here I'm just cutting about 1.5 inches off. So now it's time to cut the invisible mesh. So I just have the skirt part there and then the back piece on top. That way I can see exactly how much I need of the invisible mesh. And I'm just putting down my little stones to keep it in place and then cutting around it. But one thing to note, so for the top part of the sleeves, you do need to add more in the front, so I'm gonna add about 1 inch to that part. So that's the only difference in the pattern for the front. So as you can see here, this is where I'm adding that. So I'm just gonna take my measuring tape and I measure it, it's about 1 inch. So here I'm gonna add 1 inch to the top, and that way it needs to reach like further back on your shoulders, if that makes sense. But yeah. Invisible mesh fabrics are two-way stretch, so you want to make sure that the stretch goes horizontally across your body. I tried to cut out my appliques and it scratched my mat so bad. The disrespect. It was brand new from Christmas, so I had to bring out my old mat. And I'm just cutting out the general shape of the appliques. I'm not getting too detailed with it. And then here I'm cutting out the smaller ones. Here's what I have cut out so far. So I'm going to attach the mesh part to the skirt part, and then attach the front piece to the back piece, and then add the appliques. So I'm pinning the mesh to the skirt part, and I always start by pinning the front part and then the back part, and then I pin in the middle. And I am sewing part of this with a serger, but you don't have to have a serger. You can sew this all on a regular sewing machine. You would just use like a hem stitch or a straight stitch for this part. So now that's attached, I'm going to put the front piece and the back piece right sides together, and then I'm going to attach it on top of the shoulder parts and down the sides. So here I'm just pinning that into place. Now I'm going to sew the top of the shoulders and then down the sides, leaving the armholes, the neck parts, and the bottom open. So when I get to this seam part, I'm going to push the seam down towards the bottom of the dress. That way you don't see it through the mesh. So I didn't think about it till after, but I probably could have hemmed this neck part and the two sleeve parts, but I think it looked fine anyways without it. So it's kind of hard to see here, but I did try the dress on and make marks of where I really wanted to be covered on the dress. So I made these little oval things that I'm going to sew onto the dress. That way I can make sure that part is covered. And then I'm going to hem the bottom of the dress as well. So I pinned the little ovals into place to make sure they were even. And then I'm just going to sew around the edge of them and just make sure you don't accidentally sew through like 2 layers of mesh. So you want to make sure to keep it flat. So you gotta like, lift up the presser foot a lot. And then I just folded the bottom of the dress up about a half an inch and hemmed it with the 3-point zigzag stitch. So here's what that looked like when I was done. This tragic incident occurred where I stepped on my box of pins and they went flying all over my sewing room floor. Anyway, so now I'm going to pin the appliques in place. So I'm going to start with the top. So I'm going to make sure that I cover the little oval that I sewed on earlier and just pin them around. So for the top part, I just put 2 on each side. So now I'm going to sew them down with the zigzag stitch, and you want to really make sure that your thread matches your applique as best as possible for this part. That way it blends in good. So first I'm just gonna do like a general sew around to just get the applique in place, and then I'll do more of the details later on. Sewing the appliques can be kind of tedious, but you just want to make sure that you lift up your presser foot a lot and adjust it when needed, and to make sure that you're not sewing through more than 1 layer. So just make sure it's always flat and that none of the fabric is underneath that footer, so that you don't actually sew through another layer and have to seam rip it, because it is very hard to seam rip mesh without like putting a big hole in it. So this is what it's looking like so far. So I'm just gonna go back in and fix all these parts along the edges. So here I am going in and fixing that, and as long as your thread matches your applique really good, it doesn't have to be perfect, especially with this kind because it matched my skin tone well, so the thread wasn't noticeable at all. So here's what the top looked like when I was finished, so I'm just going to do the other side, and then I'm going to add the appliques onto the bottom. So as you can see here, I'm cutting around the applique design and not just like straight through it. That way it's a lot cuter and detailed on the sides. I really like this applique fabric that I got. I got lucky that the store that I go to has it in pretty much every color. So I'm just going to add a strip to the bottom and to the top. And honestly, I thought this design was really cute, how it looked like this. But then my original idea was to fill the whole skirt, so I just went with that. So then I'm just going to take the other little appliques and just kind of fill in that area in the middle. So here I'm just pinning everything into place. So like I said in the beginning, the front of the dress loses a lot of the stretchiness when you add the appliques because the appliques don't stretch at all. So that's why it's important to kind of leave some wiggle room in the dress. So here's what it's looking like so far, but I didn't pin the middle ones down. I'm just going to sew these 2 strips down and then add those in the middle. So I'm doing the same technique that I used to sew the appliques on the top. I'm just using a zigzag stitch, just a regular zigzag stitch, and going around the edges, doing like a general one to get everything in place, and then getting into the details. So then once that's done, I pinned the rest on there, and as you can see here, it is a lot of pins, but it was looking real cute so far. So I'm just gonna go around and sew all those down, and here's what the final product looked like. So I'm just gonna fix these sides here because the back part was a little wider, so I'm just gonna clean that up by trimming them. So here I'm just using my rotary tool and trimming off that excess. And then I just kind of went over that shoulder seam at the very top with the straight stitch. That way it just keeps the stitch really secure. And then I kind of secured the side seam. So like where the armpit part is, I just did like a little straight stitch where that seam was, just to make it secure as well. So here I'm doing that, a top stitch on the shoulder part. Low-key, I wish I would have did this dress a different color because it blended in with my skin tone very much. But I was really feeling it. The only thing I'm gonna do now is just go back in and fix these little parts like that are sticking up and not sewn down. But I think it was really cute. I think if I made it again, I would definitely ruche the back or do some kind of back design. That way the back isn't so plain. But I still love it. As always, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, just comment them down below. And I definitely plan on making more dress tutorials, so make sure you subscribe.